Hello, this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about entering the world of work. That can be scary for young people. I remember when I was going out after high school doing interviews and things like that, and especially if you didn't have the best time in high school, you think it's going to be better when I'm grown, and then you go out and get amongst these people in the work world and realize, oh, we still got, mean girls and guys in the work world. Isn't that a shame? So we're going to take up on that again. A much higher proportion, 80% of graduate and professional students are employed 63% full-time and year-round. About 70% of these employed students say their jobs help them prepare for careers. So, when you go to work at a job, it might be a place where you plan a career. I know I've done that. It didn't pan out so well, but, that's the end goal. However, they also report drawbacks, such as limitations on scheduling and number and choice of classes. So, sometimes you don't get bosses who are cool with the schedules of students, but, bosses you should be, because these are our future workers. And if you want them to pursue a career with you and your company, then it behooves you to treat them well. Just saying. The cognitive complexity of work. The nature of work is changing, and we know that from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when they had little kids out there working, and kids in my family back in England, they had kids working in coal mines, so that was not the best thing ever. Oh my, it's so hot here. It's been so hot for so long, it's terrible. But since World War II, when more women went in and stayed into the workforce, realizing, I kind of like that, but then a lot of women went back, to staying at home, and then, in the 60s, more women wanted to be independent, and so they went back into the workforce, and so, the workforce has changed from, the beginning. By 2000, there were almost 4 times as many Americans in service and retail jobs as in manufacturing. So the manufacturing jobs are not as plentiful here in America, and that's because a lot of our manufacturing jobs have been shipped, across borders and across oceans, and because the labor over there is cheaper, and the big companies, for them, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about the wallet. If you think people who own big companies are looking out for you, they're not. Just saying there. So most Americans find themselves in service and retail jobs, which a lot of people, they're not super thrilled about those jobs, but the way I look at it is like somebody's got to do it, and you're still doing something, and you're making some money, so that you can have a life. Work arrangements are becoming more varied and less stable. So, especially when we had COVID here several years back, people were working from home. And a lot of those jobs, employers realized, hey, we don't have to pay for, sick leave, break rooms, all this other stuff if these guys are working from home. So a lot of them kept it that way. And there are companies now who, they don't care if they don't like you or you ain't doing a good enough job. They just fire you because they know there's another guy behind you, in the unemployment line waiting for a job. So more and more adults are self-employed, like I was for quite a while, and basically still am. Working at home, telecommuting, on flexible work schedules, or acting as independent contractors. And there are more people who make their side hustle into their job, because the regular jobs aren't paying as well as the other things that they do. Do people change as a result of the kind of work they do? And I imagine that they do. Some research says that some people seem to grow in challenging jobs, the kind that are becoming increasingly prevalent today. So, if you have a challenging job, rather than get tired of it, say, I'm tired of this crap, I want to quit, rise to the challenge. Do your best and deal with it. But, don't let people run over you. A combination studies revealed a reciprocal relationship between the substantive complexity of work, the degree of thought and independent judgment it requires, and a person's flexibility in coping with cognitive demands. Because people want to think and do things for themselves. A lot of people get bored with repetitive tasks. I worked telemarketing for about 12 years. And yes, it was a boring job, but it was paying the bills, and I was getting bonuses, which were good for little, extras like buying kids clothes and shoes, because they don't give those away. It was a boring job, but it did what it needed to do for our family. Brain research casts light on how people deal with complex work. Full development of the frontal lobes during young adulthood may equip people to handle several tasks at the same time. Multitasking. That's what my husband jokes and calls me his multitasking wife. Because I got laundry on now. I finished dishes after lunch. There's laundry going now, and I'm finished the Bible reading, and now I'm on to the podcast. So you figure out how to do things so that you can get things done. Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, reveals that the most frontward part of the frontal lobes, the Fronto-Polar prefrontal cortex, or FPPC for short, has a special function in problem solving and planning. So if you develop these parts of your brain, you're going to be better at problem solving and planning. The FPPC springs into action when a person needs to put an unfinished task on hold. And of course, there are times you have to do that. And shift attention to another task, a process called branching. The FPPC permits a worker to keep the first task in working memory while attending to the second. For example, to resume reading a report after being interrupted by the telephone. And it might be something else. Your boss, I worked at, marketing center, Gannett Direct Marketing, and sometimes they would pull us off of jobs and say, all right, stop this job. This one's a rush. We need you to get over here and do this job. And then you have to go back to the other job. So you would have to remember how to do both of these things. Cognitive growth need not stop at the end of the workday, and it shouldn't really. According to the spillover hypothesis, cognitive gains from work carry over to non-working hours. And that's because once your brain is stimulated, the old saying, a body at rest stays at rest, a body at work stays at work. Same thing with your brain. A brain at rest stays at rest. A brain at work stays at work. So you're only helping yourself by keeping the brain busy. Excuse me. Studies support this hypothesis. Substantive complexity of work strongly influences the intellectual level of leisure activities. So not only are you doing better at work if you're stimulating your brain, but when you're at home, in your leisure activities, your hobbies, playing, you're better, quicker on the jaw. Adult education and literacy. About 48% of adults in the United States participate in educational activities. And that's almost half. So that's pretty good. 3 out of 4 participants take courses from post-secondary institutions, and the rest from business or other organizations. And this is usually to help them in the job market. Many of these adults seek to improve their work skills. Much of this work-related education and training is employer supported. Like when my son used to work at UPS, they paid for his college. He went to college and switched over and got his business degree, and UPS paid for some of those classes. So, a lot of places realize that, if they want these high-paying bosses that they need to maybe help some of these people out. And for good reason. Most occupations, especially high paying ones, that do not require a college degree or do require, let me say this again, my poor tongue, that do not require a college degree do require on-the-job training. So even if you're not getting a college degree, you do have to know how to do your job. A friend of mine, is an electrician, and he had to go to school and learn how to be an electrician, and it was at the union place, and they have on-the-job training. He was a trainee for a while. My son talks about, so-and-so was a journeyman, and so even if you don't go to college per se, you should go to a trade school and learn a trade. That's my opinion on that. Two of my kids went to college. One of them was in vocational trade school and went into a trade. So, they all got good jobs. They're, making their way. So that's my opinion. If your child is not going to go to college, get them into a trade school. Get them into a job, because if they just start working anywhere and stay anywhere, they're not going to have as good an income as if they actually, went to college or trade school. And that's just a fact. That's just the numbers tell us that. So, there are people who work their way up the ladder and become a boss and make more money or whatever. But, I became a manager after I don't know how many years in the workplace. It took me forever. I was in my 40s before I became a manager of, a counseling center. So, it takes a lot longer if you don't have that education behind you. Employers see benefits of workplace education in improved morale, increased quality of work, better teamwork and problem solving, and greater ability to cope with new technology and other changes in the workplace. And that's because they're stimulating the brain. The brain is, say, oh, we're still learning. Okay, well, we need to learn and figure this stuff out. Employees also gain in such basic skills as reading, math, and critical thinking. And that's an important thing for adults, is to have critical thinking. There are people who do not. We can look around in this country today and see that a whole lot of people, critical thinking is not on their agenda. Literacy is a fundamental requisite for participation not only in the workplace, but in all facets of modern, information-driven society. So, if you're illiterate, that's a big problem for you. Because nowadays, everything, they say print is dead, but actually not true, because your print is now written on the computer screen. So it's still there. You still have to read it. So literate adults are those who can use printed and written information to function in society, achieve their goals, and develop their knowledge and potential. And that should be everyone. There are still too many people who are illiterate in America. Everyone should be able to fulfill their potential. So if your kid is having problems, get him a tutor, get him some help. There are after school programs in a lot of schools. Go ahead and invest in your child. At the turn of the century, a person with a 4th grade education was considered literate. Today, a high school diploma is barely adequate. And I know my father-in-law, he had a 3rd grade education because his family needed him on the farm. His father passed away at some point, and they needed him on the farm. And so he had to drop out of school, but he read a lot, and he was one of the smarter people in his family. So, it turned out okay for him. Nearly half of U.S. adults cannot understand written material, manipulate numbers, and use documents well enough to succeed in today's economy. And that is a problem. I know of people who can't read basic forms to fill out. What does this mean? I don't understand this. Can you help me with this? And that's sad, because that holds them back in life. you know. So if you have this problem, my advice is go back to school, get it figured out. They have, classes for adults. They have adult education classes to hone your skills, to, get better. This finding comes from an analysis of national and international literacy surveys conducted by the Educational Testing Service. The literacy comparisons of adults in 17 higher income industrialized countries, the U.S. performance was only mediocre. So, comparing all these industrialized countries like ours, we're only so-so. We're not that great. Ranking slightly above the mean for all participating countries. This is true even though the United States spends more on education per capita than nearly all these other countries. So we spend more on education, but our children are not getting as good an education. That's got to be, a reflection on the system. The system is not working. And, we need to look at other countries who are doing better than us and maybe come up with a similar system. That is a very stubborn attitude in America. We're going to do it our way. This is the way. Our way is producing mediocre, literate people. So maybe it's time to look at other countries who are achieving higher and kind of have our school system modeled after them. And a lot of it has to do with attitudes and, wanting the summer off and things like that. But, we need to improve, folks. And we have higher rates of secondary school completion than many of them. So even though we have higher rates of secondary school completion, our people are still moderately illiterate. So that's not great. The literacy surveys revealed wide internal disparities. So it all depends, honestly, on what school you go to and who's in charge and who's teaching. The United States ranked near the top of the list of countries both in percentages of adults at the lower level of literacy and those in the highest levels. So we have the most illiterate people and also a lot of illiterate people. So, that tells me there's a problem in the school system. And basically, what I've said all along is if you wanted to learn, you could learn. No one was going to force you, but it was there for the taking. And people who are self-starters, self-finishers like myself, you could get that education, but the people who are not so motivated, they slip through the cracks. Because, once it comes to the point where no child's left behind, then what motivates them? What motivates them to learn anything? The international surveys found, not surprisingly, that literacy was directly related to occupational status and earnings. The least literate workers tended to be in blue-collar jobs or to be unemployed or out of the labor force, while those at the higher literacy level held professional or managerial positions. And I don't think that was a surprise to anybody. For U.S. test takers, the single most important factor in literacy was the level of educational attainment, and the disparity based on education was greater than in any other country. So that tells us that here in the good old USA, we ain't doing it that great. We need to look at people who are doing it better and maybe take a page out of their book. U.S. college graduates did better on the literacy test than college graduates in every other country except Belgium. So, as far as college literate folks, we did great. Poor old Belgium, they, beat us out on that one, but, that says at least that there are people, and like I say, if they're going to college, they're probably motivated to succeed. But U.S. high school dropouts did more poorly than in any other high-income country. So that tells me that they just weren't getting an education. It could have been their choice. It could have been the type of setting they were in. It could have been they had learning disabilities that were not diagnosed and treated. So, again, we need to start looking at this stuff, folks. Globally, almost 1 billion adults are illiterate. And that's around, the world. That's a lot of people. 1 billion people. Illiteracy is especially common among women in developing countries, where education typically is considered unimportant for females. So still has sexism going on in the world today. In 1990, the United Nations launched literacy programs in such developing countries as Bangladesh, Nepal, and Somalia. In the United States, the National Literacy Act requires the states to establish literacy training centers with federal funding assurance. So, here we, excuse me, Nat. That's gross. So here we have literacy centers where we're teaching people to read and write, and it's federally, funded. So, that's a good thing. Technological literacy is increasingly necessary for success in the modern world. And again, everything is technical today. Everything involves usually a computer of some sort, so you have to be able to use those. The increase in internet use is a global phenomenon. More than half of all Americans use the internet, and more than 2 million people go online for the first time each month. Now, I know back in the year 2000, when my youngest son was born, very few people had a computer. We didn't have a computer. A few years later, we got an old computer from my parents. And there were still people in the schools, when I would say, our computer's kind of slow. Can my son do this in parts, because he had, extra time on his IEP anyway. But there were still a lot of students who did not have a computer at home. So the teachers were having to allow library time for these kids to go on the computer in the library at school to do their work. In a single year, between August 2000 and September 2001, internet use at work among employed adults aged 25 and over increased from 26.1% to 41.7%. So that's almost half of the world, here in the good old U.S. has to work on a computer of some kind. So, you need to be able to do that. Young and middle-aged adults are more likely to use the internet and email at work than employed older adults. And that's because simply they did not have the computers growing up. We didn't get computers in school till my senior year. And those were the big old, black computers with the black screen and the white writing on them. So, for those who never worked on a computer, I imagine it's probably pretty hard. Work affects day-to-day life, not only on the job, but at home. And it brings both satisfaction and stress. Because, when you have a good day at work, you're feeling pretty good. When you have a bad day at work, you are stressed and angry, and, don't bring that home to your family. Go somewhere and sit at a park, chill out, listen to some good music on the way home. Don't bring that home to your family. Check that at the door. Every adult is in need of help, of warmth, of protection. In many ways differing from, and yet in many ways similar to, the needs of the child. And that's by Erich Fromm, The Same Society, written in 1955. We're going to talk about Ingrid Bergman, who is a notorious actress. Nowadays she wouldn't be. People wouldn't even bat an eye about that nowadays. But back in the day, she was. Ingrid Bergman was one of the world's most distinguished stage and screen actresses. Perhaps best remembered for her starring role in Casablanca. she won Academy Awards for Gaslight, Anastasia, and Murder on the Orient Express, the New York Film Critics Award for Autumn Sonata, and an Emmy for The Turn of the Screw. In 1981, a year before her death, she came out of retirement to play the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in the Emmy-winning A Woman Called Golda. Bergman's personal life was as dramatic as any movie plot. One of her film titles, Notorious, sums up the abrupt change in her public image in 1949, when Bergman, known as a paragon of wholesomeness and purity, shocked the world by leaving her husband and 10-year-old daughter for the Italian film director Roberto Rossellini. So you can imagine that was quite the scandal back in the day. Compounding the scandal was the news Italian film director Roberto Rossellini that Bergman was pregnant by him. At the time, he was a married man. So yes, major scandal back in the day. Oh no! 49. Bergman had been obsessed with acting since she had seen her first play at the age of 11 in her native Sweden. Tall, awkward, and shy, she came alive on stage. Plucked out of Stockholm's Royal Dramatic School at 18 to make her first film, she braved the wrath of the school's director, who warned that movies would destroy her talent. So he was resistant to change, wasn't he? At 22, she married Dr. Peter Lindstrom, a handsome, successful dentist 8 years her senior, who later became a prominent brain surgeon. It was he who urged her to accept the producer David Selznick's invitation to go to Hollywood and make Intermezzo. At 23, she arrived, to be joined later by her husband and infant daughter, Pia. Her filmmaking was punctuated by periodic spells of domesticity. I have plenty to do as usual, and having a home, husband and child ought to be enough for any woman's life, she wrote during one such interlude. But still, I think every day is a lost day, as if only half of me is alive. And a lot of women have felt that way. Domestic bliss is not always that. We want to contribute and create. And sometimes when we're just at home is not enough, And that might sound bad, but think about that as if a man said it. Would we hold the same judgment on a man? No, we wouldn't. If a man said, my job is not enough, no one would hold that against him. They would expect him to have a work, life, and a life outside of work, and hobbies and recreational activities. But when a woman says it, she's judged a little more harshly. We're all the same, folks. Bergman began to see her husband, whom she had always leaned on for help in decision making, as overprotective, controlling, jealous, and critical. And that's a shame. The couple spent long hours, days, and weeks apart. She at the studio or on tour, him at the hospital. Meanwhile, Bergman was becoming dissatisfied with filming on studio lots. When she saw Rossellini's award-winning Open City, she was stunned by its power and realism, and by Rossellini's artistic freedom and courage. She wrote to him, offering to come to Italy and work with him. The result was Stromboli, and the end of what she now saw as a constrictive, unfulfilling marriage. It was not my intention to fall in love and go to Italy forever, she wrote to Lindstrom apologetically. But how can I help it or change it? At 33, Bergman, who had been number one at the box office, became a Hollywood outcast, because you got to remember the year here. Her affair made headlines worldwide. So think about this, nowadays. Out in Hollywood, they're bed hopping 24/7. Oh, look at that, It's only a big deal when it lands on the page of the National Enquirer and the next day it's gone. So, nowadays, no one would care too much. So did the illegitimate birth of Robertino in 1950. Bergman's hurried Mexican divorce and proxy marriage there to Rossellini, who had his own marriage annulled, the birth of twin daughters in 1952, and the struggle over visitation rights with Pia, who took her father's side and did not see her guilt-ridden mother for 6 years. So, like I said, kids are put in the middle of this stuff, and that's a shame. But unfortunately, it happens. The tempestuous Bergman-Rossellini love match did not last. Every picture they made together failed, and finally, so did the marriage. But their mutual bond with their children, to whom Bergman gave Rossellini custody to avoid another bitter battle, made these ex-spouses a continuing part of each other's lives. In 1958, at the age of 43, Ingrid Bergman, her career, by this time, rehabilitated and peace made with her eldest daughter, began her third marriage to Lars Schmidt, a Swedish-born theatrical producer. It lasted 16 years, despite constant work-related separations, and ended in an amicable divorce. Schmidt and Bergman remain close friends for the rest of her life. So see, it's all about being a good partner and being supportive of your partner. Your partner has dreams and wants in their life. It can't be all about you. And if it is all about you, then you're not a good partner. And your partner is okay to find another partner as far as I'm concerned. We got to be good to each other. We got to be good to each other and support each other in our dreams. And that way, the other person don't feel like, well, you're not supporting me. You don't want me to have my own life. You want it to be all about you. And it can't be. You can be a part of someone's life, but you can't be someone's life, because then they're just not gonna be that interested anymore, because they have their own hopes and dreams, and on you. So that's where I'm gonna leave you today. Hope that help you figure out. Today it's so hot in here. It's been so hot for so long. My brain is just fried. I hope this help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time.